Hello and welcome. As he guarded nuclear weapons for the US Army, he could hardly have imagined a globe-trotting career as the man who put MTV on the map. But through his sharp business sense and his understanding of youth culture, he helped to shape a generation. This week on One on One, meet MTV's pioneering spirit, Bill Roedy. The launch of MTV Arabia was a particularly exciting milestone for Bill Roedy, marking a big step in moving the iconic music channel another notch higher on the global scale. Roedy spends much of his time on the road ensuring the network reaches out to its audience according to the vision he set when he first joined MTV soon after its launch. It was a personal mission that had him meeting historic figures such as Nelson Mandela and Fidel Castro. It was his training in the US Army, says Roedy, that gave him the discipline to persist whenever the challenges became overwhelming. He managed to fend off his critics when he decided to make the issue of HIV/AIDS a key concern for the channel, and has remained a staunch advocate in the fight against AIDS ever since. Roedy's credited with leading the pioneering spirit that made music television what it is, a channel that led a generation. Bill, it's great to talk with you.
Thank you, Rose.
And I bump into you on a regular basis around the world, you know, especially at the UN AIDS functions and so on. And I just wonder how much that's taking up your time now, the actively campaigning for HIV/AIDS awareness.
Well, you know, I've got a demanding job running this empire of 135 channels around the world. So what I did actually for that is set up a little infrastructure. And it's right next to me. Georgia Arnold is the main person on the day-to-day job of AIDS, and I just, you know, try and dip in a little bit on a daily basis, but, you know, somehow I manage it. The other thing is I built it into the DNA, really, of the entire culture. So it continues. It you know, it filtrates down to all levels, so it doesn't need my, you know, involvement all the time, but it's still a very important part of my life, and I do devote, at some point, some part of the day, every single day.
When you and I first met the very first time a few years ago in Thailand at the UN AIDS conference, I remember you sifting through your business cards to make sure you gave me the one that was in English, not in Thai. Now, I gather you have business cards in many different languages, and I wonder, you talk about the importance of localization and why it's so important to be localized.
Yeah. Well, we're in 160 countries. I learned a long time ago, I mean, it's probably the most important thing, I think, in setting this whole business, you know, to the start, which was local, because I just didn't think exporting was a sustainable business. And it was a little bit controversial at the time, because the margins shrank, it was more investment, there wasn't one product around the world, you know, like other consumer products. So it required more money, and even to this day, less margin, because it's not one single market. But it was really, I thought, the only sustainable way to go, to vertically connect with audiences. And the great thing about this is we have this amazing array of diverse channels. So we actually use these channels to our benefit, because I call them sources of cool, or sources of influence, where we take from different parts around the world and use ideas or even programming and, you know, just kind of mix it all up globally. And I think of all the things we've done, this is really the most important thing. And I steal a line from Ted Turner ages ago. We were local before local was cool, because now everyone wants to go local. But we did it, we pioneered it, and I feel, you know, really very, very good about it.
Well, it's true. Now, you're credited with being sort of Mr. MTV, the man who spearheaded MTV's growth globally, putting it out into all these countries and making it one of the top 10 recognized brands in the world. But HIV/AIDS, as you say, became a big issue for MTV from a long time ago, about a quarter of a century now. And I wonder how hard it was, you know, keeping this on the agenda on what is essentially a music channel.
The reason we've been involved in this fight in a very visible way is because it affects young people more than anybody else, and that's our audience. And because we have literally almost 2 billion people worldwide, young people, that tune into our channel, and we'd have this vertical connection with them, and we're seen as a trusted voice, we would really be remiss if we didn't tackle this epidemic. And remember, the epidemic, the epicenter, we are distributed in those areas. You know, of course, it's not only Africa now, it is India, it is China, it's Eastern Europe, it's Russia, and we're in all those countries. So it's a huge global impact, it's a global epidemic, it's treatable, it's preventable, it's the worst epidemic in recorded history, and you know, we have to be part of it.
You're a global citizen, of course. You know, you travel a lot, and it's very much a part of your DNA now to be around the world. Growing up, though, as a child, how much were global issues a part of your family?
Well, I must say, not really too much. I mean, I grew up in a single, my mother was a single parent, and it was in South Florida, in Miami, and it wasn't very high on the income. In fact, one of the reasons why I went into the military is because I went to West Point, and that was really more about economic reasons. You know, it wasn't that I was gung-ho military necessarily. And for whatever reasons, was always very curious about life. So at a very young age, I read everything I could, including the newspapers. And I think that's one thing I learned from my mother, too, because she did as well. And I suppose, even though I didn't travel until I was really in my late teens, that was my introduction to learning about the world.
Did you know your father? Did you have any relationship with him? Did he influence your character in any way?
Well, he went to West Point. So, you know, I carried on the history there, but he was a much different West Point cadet than I was. He was a very dedicated soldier. He was in World War II. He was in Pearl Harbor. And he was a career officer. And while economic reasons drove me, he did teach me certain things. You know, the discipline and the honor, I suppose, that goes with West Point. Although I never like to take myself too seriously on those issues. Even on the discipline, I kind of get away from sometimes. But I did obviously pick that up from him. And also, he always reminded me to keep a sense of humor about everything.
What about your mother? You said she influenced you in terms of reading a lot and finding out what's going on. You know, what are the ways, what are the qualities do you think she imparted to you?
Well, she was the guiding force. I mean, it's very tough to be a single mother, even now, certainly back then. And it certainly taught me to respect motherhood and how important motherhood is to the world, really, you know, to not only families. And I'm particularly partial to women leadership because I grew up in a household of women. And she struggled. It was not easy for her. And, you know, as a son, you always want to do what you can to help the situation. And I think, you know, she just brought those values to me that to really just keep going, even though life can be very difficult and often is very difficult. And it's carried over to today because I want to give my children everything.
Now, in terms of, you know, where you started to become more world aware, when you traveled and became aware of what was out there, at what point did you realize there was a big world you wanted to explore?
Well, I started in my late teens traveling. I went to Italy, for example, and I think it just grew gradually. When I left West Point, there was so much controversy about Vietnam that I thought the only way to get the true answer, somewhat naively, I think in hindsight, was to go there. And that sort of set the stage, really. I spent a year in Asia, and even though it was a combat environment, I really enjoyed the experience, and I suppose developed my first love for local, because the Vietnamese are just, you know, some of the most incredible people in the world. They're resilient, they're strong, they're beautiful, they're giving, forgiving. I taught English to the kids. You know, on the weekends and during the nighttime, and that taught me to be, I think, really respectful at the outset of other cultures, and that's carried forward to today because the defining, really characteristic, I believe, of our culture at MTV Networks is to respect other cultures, respect, and when you go into a country, bring out, don't necessarily bring in, and you know, just really treasure this amazing diversity of cultures that we have.
You're actually a decorated soldier. I should point that out. The bronze medal, I think the Air Medal, the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry, Meritorious Service Award. When you look at that side, the very structured military side, apart from the application you've used in structuring MTV, what do you think you got out of being someone part of such a rigid system?
Well, yeah, I think conversely, I tend to go the other direction. I think perhaps because I did have that strong environment of discipline. It didn't happen in my childhood, it came after, that I sometimes react against it. And I find myself often questioning authority and sometimes questioning even discipline. So, you know, what I like to have in a work environment, for example, is always never accepting no for an answer as one thing, and swimming upstream. And, you know, just because someone says it doesn't make it right. And also making it fun, which is not always the case, you know, in a military environment. So I suppose, to answer your question, it hasn't been an extension, it's been actually almost a counter reaction, if you will.
Because MTV is essentially a very disruptive technology, isn't it?
We try to be.
And in terms of music, I mean, was music a part of your life? You're you know, sort of heading up a music channel now. Music
is such a key ingredient to the world. And yes, it played a very important role in my younger life, and one of the great things about my job for the last 20 years is I haven't had to let it go. We often let it go when we're young, and I experience music every day, and I experience, again, this amazing diversity of music. I just love, and that's been a huge change over the past 20 years. When we first went into this business, it was really dominated, global music, by Anglo-American, a very small group of countries. And now it's much more diverse. It doesn't come from one source, and that's a healthier thing, a better thing. And boy, the music is just wonderful. It can be a unifying force. It can be a vehicle for cultural exchange, even. It brings people together. And, you know, it also elicits an emotional response. It's sometimes stronger than, political leadership, even religious leadership. So music is really a key ingredient to our life.
What did you listen to?
Well, now or then?
Well, then, when you were growing up, what were the
well, you know, when I grew up, it was, another generation, of course, so it was pretty harmless stuff. And when rock and roll first started, it was, doo-wop and then a lot of Motown. But, it was a gamut of, everything from, Elvis Presley, I suppose, to Johnny Mathis. And then the Beatles came, and the whole English thing came in the 60s, and then we had, rock and roll, real rock and roll. And
it's funny you say it was harmless, because it sounds like something out there now is harmful.
Well, it was. I think music, by definition, because it relates so strongly to young people, is a little bit irreverent, and therefore adults, feel somewhat often unsettled with it. But I think the interesting thing about rock and roll, when it started, it was very much that. And people said, "Oh my gosh!" Obviously, it seems very tame by today's standards, but the young people growing up then have kept music in their lives more than that generation. So rock and roll doesn't necessarily have to be the irreverence that it once was. But it still, by definition, pushes the envelope a little bit.
Well, Bill, don't go away. We're going to ask you some more questions in a moment. We take a short break here on 101. Stay with us. We'll be right back.